Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the first installment of our sustainability webinars. We're so glad you could all join us. For starters, I just want everyone to know we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please leave your questions in the Q&A box and we will get around to them. We will also be sending a follow-up email with resources and links mentioned today. So I think we're ready to get started. I'm Ashley, I'm the city sustainability planner, and I'm going to introduce our speaker, Mr. Steve Warenberg. Steve is the chair of the city's Environmental Advisory Committee. He retired from the Coast Guard in 2015 after serving in uniform and as a civilian for 48 years. He's a psychologist whose research has been to figure out why people do things they know to be bad for them and fail to do things they know to be good for them. He taught organizational behavior for 20 years at the George Washington University, and as an MIT Seminar 21 Fellow, he specialized in the study of energy security and the environment. He is a founding director of the Energy Consensus, a nonprofit dedicated to educating decision makers, and also co-founded the Association of Change Management Professionals in 2011. So Steve, my question for you to kick this all off is, what got you interested in this topic and what brought the issue to your attention?
So why am I doing this particular thing? Good afternoon, everybody. I've been involved in environmental issues since I enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1968. My first duty station was on a ship out of Wilmington, North Carolina. We had to transit 25 miles down the Cape Fear River just to get to the ocean. I was pretty disgusted by what I saw in that river. Some of you may know that in 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland was so polluted that it caught on fire. And I could imagine the Cape Fear River doing exactly the same thing. I had a lot of time bobbing around in the ocean, so I had plenty of time to read. And I guess I became an environmental activist. I was involved in some event planning for the very first Earth Day celebration in Key West, which was my next duty assignment. So I've been at this for a while. I took up the sword of clean energy with an equal concern for waste and recycling. In fact, I became an avid proponent of recycling. Now, if we fast forward 40 years or so, I can say I'm a recovering aspirational recycler. Like many of you, I figure that anything made of glass, metal, plastic, or paper could and should be recycled. But it turns out that's not just false, but creates problems of its own. So what I'm going to try to explain today is the big picture of waste, with solid waste management and recycling. But before I do, let's take a quick look at the problem statement. In the city of Bowie, we collect about 30,000 tons of solid waste a year. 69% of that goes straight to the Brown Station landfill. That leaves about 9,500 tons that could conceivably be recycled. 4,300 tons of that, which turns out to be appliances and large metal things like barbecue grills, go to the Brown Station for disassembly. A lot of that ends up in the landfill because it's just not cost effective to try to disassemble your refrigerators. In our single stream blue buckets, we collect 5,200 tons of material that goes to a materials recycling facility. Of that, about 30% of everything that comes in the door goes straight to the landfill because it's just not recyclable. So of the 4,700 tons or so that we end up collecting, we end up with only about 3,600 tons that can be baled for sale and further processing. Big picture, that means that only 12% of all of our collected solid waste is actually recycled, 12%. So let's take a look at the big picture here. We start with a purchase, and of course we do. And why do we do that? Well, why do we buy bottled water? Of course, we know it's convenient. It also seems like it's pretty inexpensive. And last but not least, isn't it healthier than the water we get from our taps? Hold on to those thoughts for a little while, and we'll come back to that. If we look at water and carbonated beverages, we find that the United States produces about 1,500 bottles per second. The average American consumes 42 gallons of bottled water and 37 gallons of carbonated beverages a year. That's about 500 billion bottles every year. But it is delicious, isn't it? Sadly, almost none of the bottles are actually recycled. That means they aren't turned into bottles again. It seems that after plastic is processed for reuse 2 or 3 times, the polymers break down so that it can't be used for that purpose. And no one sorts them out for that, so the bottle is essentially downcycled or turned into some other plastic products. But for the most part, we just discard it. 85 to 90% of all water bottles are discarded. And what does that mean? Well, we either toss it somewhere, bury it, or burn it. I drove to Delaware to meet my son and his fiance in a parking lot so we could deliver birthday gifts and chat for a bit, sitting in our own cars, talking through the open windows. Yay, COVID. We chose that rendezvous spot because it was halfway between here and where they live in New Jersey. On the drive, I saw trash in every open roadside, every field, every median, and I don't get it. Do people think that trash goes away somewhere? There is no way. I don't know if you guys are connected to Nextdoor, but there's a long stream that I noticed today about all the trash that's on Route 50. There is no way. It doesn't go anywhere. It stays right there. Well, not necessarily so. Maybe somebody picks it up. Maybe a municipal worker paid from your tax dollars, or some volunteers, perhaps. Note that the city is launching its own Adopt a Road program, similar to those of counties around us. Sometimes, as this image taken on a roadside near Columbus, Ohio in 2016 shows, it stays there. Or it ends up washing down a storm drain or blowing deeper into forests or farms. Of course, storm drains normally empty into creeks, rivers, and bays, and we see results like this. Trash washes up on beaches. If you've ever been to a resort in the Caribbean, you may have noticed the workers cleaning up all the beach trash and dead seaweed every morning before the tourists arrive. A lot of that ends up in the ocean, where it eventually breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, and is often mistaken for food by fish who happen to live there. And it tends to accumulate in the fish since it can't be digested, eventually to be found in all the muscle tissue of the fish, which we eat. Microplastic particles have been found in every ocean, sea, and bay in the world, and in us. You've probably heard of the Great Garbage Patch or the Pacific Gyre, where ocean currents tend to concentrate floating debris. It turns out today that there is a gyre like that in every ocean. Here in Maryland, we contribute to the Atlantic Gyre. Seen from above, it looks like this. Seen from below, where it isn't so dense as to completely block sunlight, it looks like this. The fish's view of humankind, I guess. If we're a bit more responsible, it ends up in a landfill. Ours is the Brown Station facility in Largo. I'm sure many of you have been there. Where this is the scene, hundreds of times a day. Trash is dumped, bulldozed, to smooth it out and compress it a bit, and then covered with a thin layer of soil. Eventually, it ends up looking like this. Though precautions are taken to reduce liquid seepage, some liquid waste leaks into the groundwater. These mountains of trash also produce large volumes of methane gas, a powerful greenhouse gas pollutant. Some municipalities have actually devised systems to capture the methane to use as fuel. The Coast Guard Yard in Curtis Bay gets much of its energy from methane pumped from a decommissioned landfill. But ironically, the methane fuels generators to create electricity, and the resulting CO2 is an even longer lasting threat to the environment than the methane. And that's all well and good until you run out of land, as many third world and developing countries are experiencing. This is the scene of a landslide of a mountain of trash in Colombo, Sri Lanka in 2017, in which 13 people were killed. And this is hardly the only incidence of this kind of thing. And of course, We could always burn it instead of burying it. This is an incinerator. It's not unlike the one not far from downtown Baltimore, where on any given day, 300 trucks pull up to a building and dump their loads into a pit filled with 2,200 tons of the city's trash. The fire burning inside that building turns the mountain of garbage into a manageable pile of ash, and it creates electricity as a byproduct. Problem solved? Well, hardly, since the social and environmental costs of the pollutants far outweigh the value of the electricity generated. Pardon me. It could come to look like this incinerator complex in Manila, Philippines. But let's explore a better idea. Let's take a look at recycling. Pardon me while I wet my throat. With one hand, I might add. Here's a good family doing what we asked them to do, putting their downcyclable plastic bottles into the big blue bin the city provides. But where does it go? Well, our great public works employees collect all of these recyclables in what is called a single stream process. That means that plastic, paper, glass, and metal are all collected in a single bin, making it much more likely that we will actually recycle. Some cities and towns that recycle have residents sort their recyclables for collection. Some even ask residents to take materials to be recycled to central collection sites where they sort them into the right dumpsters. City trucks collect the waste and take them to a materials recycling facility, or MRF, sometimes called a Murph. Ours is in Capitol Heights. Here is one of Bowie's trucks dumping one of 4 truckloads a day onto the floor of this facility. I've made a couple of trips over there, and the first sight of this mountain of material will take your breath away. It takes a few minutes to get used to the aroma too. Let's take a look inside the Murph. A big front end loader dumps bucket after bucket of material into a huge conveyor. The Murph is a maze of conveyor belts, blowers, magnets, and people who all sort it out. These angels separate what can and can't be recycled. Anything that can't be recycled ends up in a big dumpster that, when filled, is taken to the Brown Station landfill. That's right, about 30% of everything that comes in the door goes out the door as landfill waste. The sorted materials are compressed into bales, and those bales are for sale to companies that can further process it. In our Murph, they create bales of cardboard, tin and steel, bulk plastic. That's material that's larger than bottles and things of that nature, kind of like your kid's retired big wheel. Mixed paper, aluminum, and mixed plastic, where the water and beverage bottles, among other things, end up. But a lot more processing is needed before any of this becomes useful. The bales you saw are sold to companies that will further process the material for other uses. Take plastic bottles, for example. If they were pure enough and just clear plastic bottles, it could be used again to make more plastic bottles. But that's rare. More likely it goes into carpeting, clothing, insulation for jackets and sleeping bags, shoes, and even glasses frames. But these downcycled products can't be recycled, not mechanically anyway. That leads us to another approach, chemical recycling. This depicts how plastics are made. It all starts out as a fossil fuel, either crude oil or natural gas. Those are converted into big single molecules, which are chained to become polymers. You might recognize polyethylene and polypropylene as forms of plastic. As you might imagine, chemical recycling is the reverse of this process. The plastics are converted back into their ethylene and other components. It is certainly noteworthy that it is an energy-intensive process, and the costs are starting to pile up by the time we get to this point. Is it worth it? Well, let's take a look at the plastic manufacturing process. Take that 2 hands full of plastic material we just saw. Again, in a perfect world, it can become plastic bottles. Not usually the case. But let's take that case. The material would be molded into these shapes, and then heated and blown into plastic bottles. But the costs accumulated so far make recycled plastic much more expensive than plastic made from raw crude and gas. There's very little financial incentive for manufacturers to use recycled material instead of raw material, particularly when the demand for petroleum products is declining due to alternative energy sources driving the price down. So most chemically recycled plastic is used for fuel. Yeah, that's right, just burned as fuel. The petroleum and plastics industry calls this advanced recycling. Way to spin it, folks. But let's get back to our bottle. Now we can sell this bottle to companies that need bottles, like, water bottlers. Or we can dye the plastic and put in all kinds of things like detergents, carbonated beverages, and cleaning supplies. But the colored bottles are much harder to recycle. Well, of course they are. But we aren't through yet. We still have to get the bottle to us. It goes to wholesalers. Wholesalers transport the bottles to retailers. And finally, we're back where we started. However, there was a lot of time, effort, and money involved in getting us here. And almost invariably, it isn't the same plastic we started with. Let's take a look at the entire cycle again and maybe answer a couple of unanswered questions. Is bottled water more convenient? Well, I guess so. It depends on how lazy we are and how much we want to contribute to the accumulation of single-use plastic waste. Personally, I'm getting where I could fill my own bottles. Is it healthier? In general, no. Most bottled water is just municipal water, sometimes extra filtration. There are a few true spring waters on the market, but they have all kinds of chemicals in them from natural processes and still must be further processed and filtered. Is it cheaper? Corporations buy municipal water for an average of 1 cent a gallon, filter and bottle it for sale at about $1.33 per gallon. The bottle costs a nickel. Not a bad business to be in, and with tremendous incentives to get us to buy more. Thus, the name advanced recycling was born. The industry figures it might help convince us that it's a real breakthrough, and there's an easy solution to the problem of more and more single-use plastic. It's noteworthy that the chemical recycling process has never been scaled to a commercial success. So is bottled water actually healthier, more convenient, cheaper? Well, you decide for yourself. Let's again take a look at the big picture here. Pardon me. Our demand for products at the point of purchase is what drives producers. The relative costs of raw versus recycled materials and the fluctuations in the price of crude oil and natural gas create an uncertain market for recycled materials. This is particularly true for plastic recycling and to a degree for paper and cardboard recycling and tin. About the only things that really work for recycling market consistently are aluminum, steel, and glass. So let's pause and think about that for a minute. If you buy a quart of milk in a bottle, it would probably cost more than buying the same quart in a plastic container. But the bottle can be returned to the retailer, often for deposit, washed, sanitized, and reused. On the other hand, the plastic bottle accumulates all the costs of discarding, waste collection and disposal, and recycling, all paid for most often by your tax dollars. So the industry is really passing the costs along to you as a taxpayer. A small amount of that is recovered in the sale of recycled materials. For example, last year, Bowie sold its total recycled materials for $1,000, and it spent about $103 per person to deal with the solid waste collection and disposal. We paid that. I said I was a recovering aspirational recycler. That means that in the past, I contributed a lot to that 30% of stuff that the Murph sends to the landfill, and I paid extra to have it sorted out. That idea brings us to the last loop here, the yellow loop, the loop where we as citizens and individuals and families and households can contribute to the solution. Simply put, buy less, buy smarter, reuse everything you can, and what you can't, dispose of it properly. We'll deal with a lot of those in future webinars in this series, but for now, if you can get what you need in glass or aluminum or even steel cans instead of plastic, please do. And the better you are at making sure that only recyclable materials for which there is a market go into the blue bins, the more efficient our recycling program will be. Let me repeat that. The better you are at making sure that only recyclable materials for which there is a market go into the blue bins, the better. After all the things we've talked about so far, we recognize that only 12% of our collected solid waste is actually recycled. Do you know anyone who doesn't bother to recycle? Of course, we all do. That means that part of the 69% of waste that goes straight to the landfill should be on the top line as part of the recycled stream. Can we improve that? Yes, we certainly can. We can first make sure that everything that can be recycled is put into the recycling stream, not sent to the landfill. Reduce that 69%. When you buy a new appliance, particularly large items like refrigerators that require some installation, the company will take away the old one. Often they're sent to specialized recycling facilities that know how they're assembled and know how to take them apart in ways that results in reusable or recyclable materials. Wouldn't it be nice if all the companies you buy things from had to take back the things you no longer need, want, or are replacing? And what about all that packaging? Most states have or have proposed legislation to that effect. In the current legislative slate in Maryland, for example, House Bill 36, the Packaging, Containers, and Paper Products Producer Responsibility Act, who names these things, is designed to do just that, make producers responsible for their packaging. That will help create incentives for producers to be as efficient as they can be and not simply transfer the cost of package disposal to the buyer or to the taxpayer. While I'm on the topic of legislation, there are a number of other bills, and we'll put these in the references that we leave you with. For example, there is a bill in the House right now, a prohibition on the chemical conversion of plastic unless it is used for something besides fuel. There's a ban on single-use plastics, which means you'd have to actually ask for utensils if you wanted plastic utensils for your takeout food. There's a bill that is a beverage container deposit program, another one that is a plastic bag reduction act, and there's a prohibition on releasing balloons into the atmosphere, which turns out to be a bigger deal than you might think. And there's always making sure that what we put in the bin is the right stuff, the stuff that can go to the landfill. All of the items that you see on this list are considered to be recycling contaminants. We recovering wish cyclers thought they ought to be recycled, but they aren't. And this isn't just material that can't be recycled. It often contaminates materials that could be recycled, but now can't. Take that pizza box, for example, that everybody asks about. You know, the top is generally pretty clean and has very little grease on it and can probably be easily recycled as cardboard. The bottom, however, is usually covered with grease and cheese and sauce, and that cannot be recycled. Obviously, if you throw the whole box in, none of it gets recycled. And as a matter of fact, if you throw a bunch of other paper in on top of that, it won't be recyclable either because it will have been contaminated by the pizza box. Clean and dry is best. For example, rinse as much product out of the bottles and cans as you can, put the lids back on so what's left won't contaminate the paper and the cardboard. That doesn't mean you have to spend 20 minutes trying to get the peanut butter out of the jar, which we all know to be impossible. A lot of that will be burned off. However, if you can rinse out most of the material, then it's much easier to be recycled and much more lucrative for the recycler and for us. Things like plastic bags, garden hoses, and coat hangers, although you would think the material could be recycled, and just ends up jamming up the Murph's sorting equipment. That causes lost time as everything has to be shut down for cleaning. Generally, the bottom line is, when in doubt, leave it out. Ashley, I think we probably have time for some questions here. Do you have any?
Great. Yeah, we have quite a few from Miss Thomas. A few I was able to send to her directly. Like, she asked if Bowie has a recycling pickup day, and I sent her the link. And for those of you listening in and also curious about that, we will send you the link to the schedule in the follow-up email as well, so that everyone can see that for themselves. Another question she had, Steve, is when bottles are sold, is there a requirement that a recycling bin be placed near it? For example, if there's a soda machine, is there a requirement for a recycling bin to be near it?
No, not specifically. There is a requirement that places that serve anything like that, in other words, if you could, open your bottle and drink it right there, then they have to have a recycle bin. But that's, kind of rare, and nobody ever gets arrested for not having it. So, sorry, nope.
Yeah, in the city of Bowie, we have a requirement that in all of the public areas, parks, that there's trash cans and recycling bins, but not necessarily down to the level of next to certain machines, just so that they are accessible in public places. So the next question from her, this is also a really good one that you touched on a bit, but do you have any incentives in mind to generate more interest in recycling?
Well, I don't think we have anything specific in mind for that. I think probably the best thing we're going to be able to do at the moment is both education and feedback. In some cases, cities and municipalities have found that if the people who are collecting the recycled material, particularly single stream recycled material, find something that when they open the bin can't be recycled, like that garden hose, they would take it out and put a little sticker saying this can't be recycled. That helps, because a lot of times it's just a matter of people not understanding what can and cannot be recycled. Other than that, I don't think we have anything specifically in mind for incentives, although that's certainly a question that the EAC is going to wrestle with. So thank you for it.
Sure. Quickly, Tetra Pack soup boxes, can they be recycled? I believe the answer is yes on that, as long as they are rinsed out and the lid is put back on them. Right, Steve?
I believe that's true. I'm trying to think exactly what that is. Can you be more descriptive?
If that person wants to add into the Q&A, they can. I picture that, and may be wrong, but I'm picturing that like vegetable broth and soup boxes, like that type, like a box of broth.
Oh,
I
I
know.
see. Yes. Okay.
If
Okay.
you follow on the side of them, they have a label. It says how to recycle, which is also a website, a great resource that I'll probably add in the email as well. But it tells you to rinse it off and add the lid back on. It says that on a lot of things, like, coffee creamers and things as well. So make sure you're looking out for that.
Yeah, the problem is that packaging that is mixed. For example, I get flats from Amazon that are paper, and yet they have bubble wrap that is bonded to the paper on the inside, and that can't be recycled because they can't get it apart easily to make it recyclable. So really, it depends on what the packages are made of. So.
Yeah. So the next one is there any way to responsibly recycle items that Bowie cannot recycle, but technically are recyclable? It seems like a lot of work for things like batteries, light bulbs, propane tanks. I will say, Steve, I'll let you take this as well, but I will say that is kind of the answer. It does seem like a lot of work, but something that might not be recyclable in your municipality may be recyclable elsewhere. And at times that could be one of your only options, but not the only ones. Places like Mom's there and, Home Depot, that take old light bulbs, and Mom's that takes a variety of things that are recyclable. They can also be resources, but at times it does unfortunately require work on the citizens' end if they want to recycle it.
Yeah, there are a couple of directions one can go with that. Um, Someplace like the places you've mentioned, for example, all the hardware stores take either they all take light bulbs, and
CFLs.
although it turns out that the LED light bulbs are not recyclable, you might as well just throw them in the trash. Ironic, isn't that? The CFLs are recyclable and should be recycled because there's a dangerous gas inside. So, and they take NiCad batteries, rechargeable batteries. They take other materials as well. The grocery stores, of course, are taking back the plastic bags that you get your groceries in. That's not every plastic bag that you run into, however, can be easily recycled. Generally speaking, if you can't poke your finger through it, it's probably not the right kind of material. That would be a type 4 plastic. And if if it's something that crinkles, it can't be recycled like that. So, it's almost like you've got to know a whole bevy of rules in order to make it work. Mom's, as you said, takes a lot of things, batteries and things that alkaline batteries and things that you wouldn't normally think of as recyclable. I just put them in a plastic bag, and when the little bag is full, I generally find myself up in that general direction anyway, and I can drop the batteries off in that plastic bag. Bowie, a couple of times a year, does what they call electronics recycling. Now, you can take all that stuff to the landfill, but that's pretty inconvenient, to be perfectly honest. And, I've got a shed that stuff piles up in until it's enough for me to throw it in the back of my car and take it down to a landfill. But Bowie, a couple of times a year, and they just had one, as a matter of fact, an electronics recycling event that was concurrent with a paper shredding event, which is always useful. I take a couple of bankers' boxes of paper up there every year to shred. And in the electronic recycling end of it, and that's usually stuff like computers and stuff with screens and monitors and all kinds of things. But they also take those batteries. So again, alkaline batteries can be recycled, but it's not something that goes in the Bowie's single stream. As a general rule, anything that's smaller than about the size of a business card is going to fall through all the screens and traps at the Murph and end up on the floor to be pushed into a bin where it goes down to the landfill. So size matters. And that's why, for example, I see there's a coffee there about single-use coffee pods for K-cups. They say they're recyclable, but guess what? Not in our facility, they aren't. Some companies are making it possible. For example, I get Nespresso pods for a little espresso maker, and they too are a little, they're part plastic, part metal pods, but they send me a bag with every order I get from them, and I put all the empties, not empties, but used. And think about that for a minute. If you had to empty out every coffee pod, which I tried for a while, by the way, but that turns out to be absolutely out of the question when you think about it. But putting the whole thing in a bag and sending 100 of them back to them to have them do that because they have an industrial process to do it makes sense. And a lot of producers are getting more and more in touch with the idea that they're really responsible for their stuff. I have some hopes that the bill that's in the House and right now in the Maryland State House will lead to some regulation of producers and make them shoulder some of the costs of that rather than having it all dumped on us. We're not the cause of everything that needs to be recycled. Manufacturers and producers are the cause of everything that needs to be recycled or becomes part of the waste stream. So, you know, it's time for us all, I think, to push back on manufacturers and producers to get them to recognize that they're the problem, not us. And to blame us and our failure to recycle is on that problem is just, that's false, completely false. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant there.
That's okay. So going off of that, yeah, the soft plastic, like the yogurt cups specifically, are recyclable typically. You just need to check the number on the bottom of it. I know with the yogurts that I purchased, we take off the foil, rinse them out, and they're recycled. I believe there are two. So that goes into the next question from Maureen. Steve, did you want to explain the difference in the types of plastics?
Well, we're actually going to have a whole next webinar. I think it's going to cover a lot of that, but in general, 1 through is it 1 through 5 are recyclable, except for
1 through 3, 5, and 7. So 4 and 6 aren't.
4 and 6, yeah. And the reason for that is twofold. One, most of the 4 stuff is the plastic bags that you get your groceries in. Not all of it, but most of it. And it takes a real specialized recycling facility to deal with that stuff. 6, I think, is out of the question, as is all styrofoam, by the way, as far as our recycling is concerned. There is in Crofton, there's a place that recycles styrofoam. We've tried to talk the city into putting a couple of styrofoam recycling collection points, but it's all very complicated and we haven't been able to pull that off yet. So far, you got to save it. The good news is that styrofoam packing peanuts that we used to get, nowadays, they're not always styrofoam packing peanuts. A lot of them are made out of corn products. And if you get them wet, they melt. So, you know, that seems like an interesting producer solution to that problem.
So just to follow up, the difference in the numbers is just the type of plastic, whether it's exactly the breakdown of it, of the chemicals, whether it's structural hard plastic like a clamshell or a water bottle, or whether it's thinner trash bag, etc. So it denotes the type of plastic. So 1 and 2 are not the only ones actually recycled. I do know that in places like Ocean City and Salisbury, they can only take 1 and 2 plastic. That's essentially all that they recycle, which is interesting. But that's not the only thing that we recycle here. And like Steve said, 4 and 6 are just, we don't have the right technology to process it here. So I will send also in the follow-up email a graphic that explains that a little bit better for you and provides examples kind of each number.
I'll add, by the way, to that, Ashley, that the little triangle symbol with the number in it, that sort of leads you to believe that anything with that triangle symbol can be recycled, and that's not the case.
Yeah, you have to look in your municipality.
Right, exactly. And
yeah. So the graphic that we'll send you is what Bowie accepts, and Bowie accepts 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7, and the graphic will explain to you what those are. But yeah, we are lucky here that we're able to recycle the vast majority of plastics.
Right.
So we have a question here about glass jars. Do glass jars get crushed and sent for processing? And also, what about rigid styrofoam, which you kind of touched on, but what about glass jars?
Rigid styrofoam's out, just because, as I said, it takes specialized facilities to do it, so we just don't collect it here in Bowie. The glass jars, do they get crushed? Well, sometimes they do, not intentionally, but they do get reused. And by that, I mean, eventually they get crushed and reused in all kinds of ways. They're being fashioned into countertop materials. They can be melted and reused. because the glass is glass. And as a matter of fact, glass is something that can be used over and over and over without degrading. So to the degree that the glass can be collected and can be made relatively pure, it can be melted down and made into glass bottles again. So.
Mhm. And looping back onto the styrofoam issue, technically styrofoam is not recyclable. There are certain special groups and special pickups that they'll take that styrofoam back, but it's not like through the single stream through your municipal process. It's a specialized thing. And as Steve noted, there is one of those in Crofton. You know, but that's the only one.
There's a set of dumpsters in a lot that's adjacent to the post office in Crofton. And for the life of me, I can't remember right off the top of my head what the name of the organization is that collects it. But they're able to crush it down and make interesting things out of it. I'll add, by the way, that not every grocer, but a few of the grocers around here, Harris Teeter, for example, they have a relationship with Trex, which is the company that makes deck materials and benches. And I think the Lions Club is working in conjunction with Harris Teeter and Trex to make benches that are being placed in various places around the city. So.
Yep. So we have one here about shredded paper. Is it true that shredded paper, receipts, etc., are both not recyclable and should go in the trash?
Much to my chagrin, shredded paper should go in the trash, mainly because they have no way to convert that into bales of paper to sell. It ends up either and I even thought, well, if I put my shredded paper, take it out of my shredder and put it in a paper bag, can that do it? But the Murph is hardly able to sort all that out and make sense of it all. So as a result, no, shredded paper is not usually recycled. And many of the receipts that you get that can be printed on paper that can't be recycled anyway. It's chemical paper that's imprinted, not with ink, but it's through a pressure process. And that's stuff that is, as a matter of fact, it's relatively toxic, so don't eat it either. But no, most receipts like that can't be recycled. And again, I go back to if it's about the size of a business card and it's pure paper, maybe. That's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, I always make sure to tell people that the most important thing is that if it's structural, like if you can hold the piece of paper and fold it into something, or like a piece of cardboard that you can see it and imagine it being turned into something else, because shredded paper, how can you unless you're taping it together? So you want to focus on the bigger picture, recycling what you can and what you properly can. So all of your, cereal boxes, stock, printer paper, things like that you can really see and picture them being turned into something else. Same goes with plastic. That's just a really good rule of thumb to follow.
Yeah, and I'll add to that plastic boxes and cartons, not plastic, cardboard cartons and boxes, particularly boxes like you get stuff shipped to you in, all the Amazon boxes and that sort of thing. If you can make them flat, you save a lot of time and energy at the recycling facility, because they essentially have to make them flat, because those are separated out from everything else using big blowers. And boxes are problematic when it comes to those big blowers. So just having breaking your box down so it's flat instead of a box is helpful.
Not to mention you make
mandatory, but helpful.
and not to mention you make more room in your own recycling bin when you do that.
Yeah, which matters to me now that I've really gotten the hang of what can go and what can't, even though I'm trying very hard not to buy as much stuff that needs to be recycled. It's just not easy. We've got to convince manufacturers that that's the right way to do things before we're going to solve that problem. But But yeah, I put a lot more in my recycle bin that should be recycled than I have in trash nowadays. So only because we're trying to be real careful about it.
And the last question here is, will you be sent the slides? And yes, um, we will most likely send out the slides, and I'll also send everyone Steve's information and my information, obviously. So if you have further questions, you'll be able to contact us and ask us directly any
And
questions you might have.
I see one that just popped up. That's a good one from
Yeah.
Maureen Klein, by the way. Can wet cardboard be recycled? The answer is no. Wet paper does not recycle, which is why one has to be careful about the contaminants in the recycle bin.
Yes, exactly.
And we'll send. The slides are problematic, but we'll end up putting this online, this presentation online, and send everybody who was here a link to that presentation.
That's right. Yeah, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Steve, for presenting all this valuable information. We will follow up with everyone, like we said, and you can look forward to more webinars in the near future on electric vehicles and other forms of recycling.
Thank you, everybody. Let's wrap it up.
All right, thanks, everyone.